Every who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton, but where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and no prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
Even back in 2015, a few years into programmatic advertising, AppNexus put out a press release saying that they cleaned up their own exchange. And they went from 280 billion impressions per month to 20 billion. Okay, so 280 down to 20. So they cleaned up 92% of their own inventory, saying that it was so obvious fraud that they had to do it, otherwise they'd go out of business, right? So I've written also that ad fraud has been a 90+% problem since the beginning.
This is Small Press, Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Gewertz. Small Press Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. All right, today on the podcast, I am joined by Dr. Augustine Fou. He is the founder of FouAnalytics and I believe Marketing Science Consulting Group too, and he has a deep background. You can just head on LinkedIn and look in cybersecurity, digital marketing, analytics, a lot of stuff that's over my head. So Dr. Fou, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul. Good to be here with you.
Yes. And the reason I reached out, you did a presentation on a group call that I'm normally a part of, but I wasn't there. And out of, I think, the 10 people on the call, I think 4 of them have brought it up in later calls, how enlightening it was. So I was like, I gotta have this guy on the podcast. First of all, let's get a baseline. Can you tell us about your background, yourself, and your career?
Sure. I've been in digital marketing almost since the beginning. So if you think back to 1995, 96 timeframe, I was still at McKinsey and Company at that time. And we had a multimedia lab in the New York office where it was 2 Sun workstations, 2 Apple computers, and 2 IBM PCs. And we were trying to show the associates what the internet was. And back then it was basically just, HTML pages with just text, and a few of the words were underlined. So you can click on it and go to the next page. Back then they still didn't even have images. But we were talking about the potential impact of the internet and how it would change entire industries. Literally we're at 30 years now, right? 2025. And we've actually seen it dramatically shape and change industries. Including our own in digital advertising. So I decided to leave McKinsey in 96 to kind of not be a spectator to the industry and just kind of jump in with both hands and both feet into what is known as Silicon Alley here in New York, as opposed to Silicon Valley in California. So I've kind of witnessed the entire arc of the evolution of digital marketing, from the very beginnings of, like I said, HTML to showing banner ads or display ads on yahoo.com. And over the years, I've also worked on the client side at American Express in digital marketing, as well as 2 agency holding companies, first at Interpublic Group and then second at Omnicom. But about 12 years ago, I got into this consulting, which is auditing digital campaigns, because we were noticing some strange things in the data, like 200% click-through rates. Right. Obviously, humans don't click on ads that much, but bots do. And back then, no one could really tell me what was the cause. So I had to start building some of my own tools to do the analysis. So initially, we just built the tools to help audit campaigns, and I was the only one using the tools, and I would just deliver the consulting through PowerPoint. But fast forward to 2020, I decided to open up the platform to others to use. So I just gave it a name, FouAnalytics, and started adding user accounts so that they can log in and use FouAnalytics for themselves. And there are 2 components to it. One is for websites, where we put the code on the page, just like Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics. And the second component is the in-ad version, where we're tagging the ads themselves to see where the ads went and whether bots or other forms of fraud caused it to load. So that's kind of the whole evolution of FouAnalytics and kind of my background all in one.
Man, you said you go back to the beginning, and you're not kidding. Just the mental image of an office at McKinsey having, I think you said 6 computers. That's just it's
Like,
hilarious.
Sun, workstations are not around anymore,
Yeah.
right? And Apple II computers are not around anymore. So yeah, it goes all the way back. And the internet was in military and academia before, right? And that was right around the time when it started spilling into the public sector. So, aside from digital marketing, it has had profound impact on other industries as well, including local news. One of the things I've cited over the years is that many local news outlets have gone out of business because the digital side didn't make enough revenue for them to survive. So that's actually a sad fact that we're now witnessing, right? In the last 15 or 20 years, many local news publications have died and gone away. So there are entire cities that have no local newspaper anymore.
Yep. Yes, that is, and that's I mean, myself and my audience are sadly well too aware of that fact.
Mhm.
That's kind of what this podcast was started for. Also to combat the narrative that the local news is dead, because I think there's exciting things happen. But
There's a need for it, right?
There
There's a
is
dramatic need for it. Yes.
There is. Yes. A lot of my calls center around this, but I'll get into the kind of the core of what I asked you to come on here for. Was I am part of a group call of analytics in local media people, and you did a presentation on there that I missed that call. But I think out of the 10 or 12 people on the call, 4 or 5 of them talked about this and raved about your presentation. And I was kind of bummed I missed it. So that's why I asked you to come on. So, and the core of that was you wrote an article on LinkedIn a little while back titled "Good Publishers Take Back the Ad Revenue That Went to Toll Takers," where you report that good publishers have been shortchanged on a massive scale by the current digital ad ecosystem. So that's what I'd like to dig into. So I guess the kind of first little subpoint I have is, where exactly is the value leaking in the ecosystem?
Yeah. So to kind of understand this, I need to kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about the evolution of digital marketing and then when programmatic media buying took hold. So, the original idea of digital marketing was all good, right? As most ideas are, right? The original idea was great, lots of benefits potentially. But usually reality gets in the way, and the real life situation could be very different from the theory, right? The theoretical goodness of it. So in the early days, as I mentioned before, we saw banner ads on yahoo.com, and those were like the big original portals where they aggregated a whole bunch of different kinds of information like stock quotes, weather, sports scores, news, and that kind of stuff. And so it gathered a huge audience. And so basically, once they have such a large audience, they would do essentially like what they did in print, which is put an ad on the page. So instead of a page in the magazine, they now put banner ads on the website. Same exact model. And the original business model was cost per thousand, right? CPM. So they would just depend on the number of page views that would give them the ad inventory, and they would sell that. So those were the original portals. They had massive audiences. And then we started the fragmentation process where we started developing more and more niche content. So these were still large, right? So remember Technorati, Engadget, Gizmodo, these vertical blogs that focused on, say, tech topics. And there were obviously others that focused on other topics. So it became a little bit more specialized, not just the general massive portal with every kind of information. The content became a little bit more specialized. So then they started to do the same thing, right? They started charging for the ads on the site, and they could charge even a higher premium because it was a vertical audience. And then we saw the rise of blogging platforms like Blogger and WordPress, and that basically democratized the process of getting content online. So then more and more people could create content, and they would monetize it using this exact same mechanism of ads, right? Digital ads. These would be just simple banner ads on the website. So again, each of those blogs were more niche, more long tail, more specialized. So obviously the audiences are getting smaller and smaller, right? Because those are particular topic areas. So it got to a point where there's so many websites that needed to monetize. It became untenable for the advertisers to go to one site after another to negotiate advertising contracts, right? So it was easy when it was Yahoo. It was easy when it was Engadget, Gizmodo. They were large enough. But now think of the hundreds of thousands of small websites, right? An advertiser would not spend the time to go negotiate ad deals with each of them. So that created the need for what we now call ad exchanges, right? And the original one was AppNexus. And what they did is they created a platform that aggregated thousands and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of these tiny, tiny websites. And they added a layer of auctions, right, or a bidding process on top of that. So just like Wall Street brings together buyers and sellers of shares of stock, these ad exchanges brings together buyers and sellers of ad impressions. So now the big advertisers would have one place to go, right? The ad exchange to say, okay, I have this chunk of money, right? I have this budget. I want to get it out across all of these sites that are in your exchange. And then the exchange would basically handle that auction process, right? It was new tech, new platform, and they would ultimately place those ads on hundreds of thousands of different websites. So that's kind of the quick summary of the evolution. And really where the problems crept in is when programmatic media buying, where the majority of the dollars were being spent in these ad exchanges, became the dominant form of media buying. So prior to that, the advertisers could still sit across the table and talk to someone who worked at the publisher, like Condé Nast, Meredith, Hearst, Time Inc., and things like that. And so you could actually see it's a real company, and those big publishers were not trying to rip you off, right? With the advent of exchanges, it gave the bad guys a giant loophole to onboard fake inventory and fake websites, right? So in AppNexus, we can now see bad guys or fraudsters upload or onboard tens of thousands of fake websites made using WordPress templates. Right? They would just plagiarize all the content. They would just put it on a WordPress site, copy and paste some code from AppNexus, and start running ads. And I studied the fraud problem, and we'll kind of get back to how that's impacting the publishers in a second. But even back in 2015, a few years into programmatic advertising, AppNexus put out a press release saying that they cleaned up their own exchange, and they went from 280 billion impressions per month to 20 billion. Okay, so 280 down to 20. So they cleaned up 92% of their own inventory, saying that it was so obvious fraud that they had to do it, otherwise they'd go out of business, right? So I've written also that ad fraud has been a 90+% problem since the beginning. But that was a data point from 2015. So all the bad guys are now inserting themselves into the supply path between the advertiser and the publisher. And when they take money, right, when they make profits and revenue, all of that money is coming out of the path between the advertiser and the publisher. So that's what I mean by that's the origin of when bad guys and ad tech middlemen are starting to take money away from the good publishers, because that money has to come from somewhere. It's the advertisers spending the money, but it's not getting to the publishers on the other end. And after 2 decades of that, that's really the underlying reason why so many local news publishers have died and gone away. And large publishers, right, large mainstream publishers have seen 2 decades of revenue decline and margin compression because the money's going somewhere else, not into their pockets. Despite the enormous flow of dollars from other channels like TV and print and radio into digital, a lot of that money is going into those middlemen, right? Those toll takers, like I said before. So that's kind of the background. To tie it to local media, we see that these local news publishers, again, they made the transition from print to digital. But when you think about the local news website, there's not a huge amount of traffic. And so when you have a business model, right, programmatic advertising depends on the volume of impressions, right, the numbers of impressions based on the number of page views. If the local news website doesn't have a lot of page views, they don't have a lot of impressions to sell. So then when you're a big advertiser, you're saying, wow, I'm looking for tens of billions of impressions. I only see like 2,000 over here. It's too small for them, right? So then they're chasing other things. And so that's how the money started getting diverted away from both local news publishers as well as mainstream publishers. Because even the largest of the mainstream publishers, like the CNNs, the Washington Post, and whatever, they didn't have tens of billions of impressions to sell. So that's kind of how all that money and all the, I guess, good marketing practices started to go out the window, and the money started going into ad tech companies' pockets as well as bad guys in the mean.
That's a great kind of description of the history. I've never really heard it explained that way. My next question was like, which players are the biggest culprits? And I was thinking in terms of the ad exchanges, data brokers, etc. But I'd like to also ask, who are these bad guys? Are these like lone wolves? The image of a guy sitting in his mom's basement putting up a bunch of spam websites, or are they larger players? So on both of those, who are the bad guys, and how did these other bigger players let it slip through like that?
It kind of started that way. So again, in 2016, 2017 timeframe, there was a Bloomberg article, and they cited a guy named Boris in Brooklyn. And he was one of those guys who literally set up a whole bunch of fake websites, bought some bot traffic to generate the page views, and then all of a sudden he had all these impressions to sell. So yes, it dates all the way back to that, and it started with individual actors who were saying, well, why wouldn't I just put up some websites and start making money that way? And so prior to that, prior to programmatic exchanges, if you're a nobody, right, and you only had like 5 websites that hardly had any traffic, you could never sell ads to Procter & Gamble, Unilever, these big, huge advertisers. But once programmatic ad exchanges came along, it became easy. Like I said earlier, it created this giant loophole for anyone, including script kiddies, right, teenagers, to just create tens of thousands of WordPress sites that into the exchange and kind of hide amongst everything else. So then when the ad buyer goes to the exchange and says, I have $60 million I need to spend, can you help me spend it? The ad exchange says, happily, I'll help you spend it. No one's even asking the question whether the ads were shown to humans or not, and where the heck the ads were shown, because nobody's going to go through a spreadsheet that had 100,000 rows in it to say, okay, what are these websites in here? I've never heard of them before, right? Nobody's doing that work. And so again, when programmatic media buying became the dominant form of buying media, right? Because of efficiency, because of low cost and all that kind of stuff, all those excuses, all those reasons, like 2012, 2013 timeframe, that's when everything went to hell, right? And that's when all the money started flowing into the bad guys' pockets as well as the middlemen's pockets. So to answer your second question, who's the culprit? Everyone is part of the problem. I would not say that the ad exchanges themselves were creating fake websites and using bot traffic, but they were certainly benefiting from it, because if someone else did that, like if Boris created 1,000 websites and put it in AppNexus, he gets a part of the rev share of the revenues. The exchange gets a part of the revenue as well. So the exchange is not in a hurry to cut that off and reduce the fraud. So basically, I would call them complicit, and I would say there's misaligned incentives because they don't want to reduce the fraud, because the fraud and the bot traffic is generating so much volume. The middlemen, right, they're all toll takers. They get a cut when it passes through their exchange. So then you would say, oh, well, what about the fraud detection companies? So we have, I'm not going to name the names, what I'm going to call legacy fraud verification companies. They were supposed to detect the bots and help reduce or stop the fraud. But what they had reported for the last 9 years straight is that there's been 1% invalid traffic, right, in what they can see. Now, after so many years of them reporting 1%, everyone now realizes, okay, it's not 1%, right? Common sense tells you the fraud is way, way higher than that. They now understand that the 1% is not all the fraud there is. It's all the fraud that these legacy vendors could catch. Jeez. Now, the problem that created is that when these legacy vendors, so think back to 2015, 2016 timeframe, even AppNexus itself admitted and detected 92% fraud, and they cut off all those all those websites and sellers. The fraud detection companies only detected 1% of it. So when other people saw those numbers, they said, great, there's only 1% fraud. Let's just keep pouring more money into it because there's obviously no problem. And it also fit the narrative of those who are trying to sell more programmatic ads, including the media agencies. And so the media agencies saw the opportunity to make a lot more margin by pushing programmatic ads as opposed to buying from mainstream publishers. The original publishers were selling ads at $35 CPMs. Oh, look over here. If you buy through programmatic exchanges, you can get it for $3, 1/10 the price. So they started steering more and more of their clients' budgets, right? And these are typically the largest of advertisers. They would now pour their money into programmatic, thinking that everything was okay because these fraud verification companies kept telling them everything was 1% fraud. Okay, so you see how that kind of misled them into overspending on programmatic. And that's been true for the last 10 years, right? Because these vendors have failed to detect the fraud, all these big advertisers have moved budget into programmatic, thinking everything was fine, but it has not been. And now, 15 years later, I actually just put out this post. We now see actual evidence that many of the largest brands have not grown in the last 10 to 15 years, right? It's literally been flat. So despite the massive investments in digital advertising, they have not grown anything, right? In fact, they've shrunk. So if you see that kind of outcome, right, sometimes it takes a long time to play out. These big advertisers have not grown despite the billions of dollars spent in digital marketing. What actually has happened? It's basically been because their ads have not even been shown to humans. They get huge quantities, like tens of billions of impressions per month. But the vast majority of those, like 90+%, are shown to bots, software programs. Or in some cases, right, I've even documented these fraud cases where they didn't even run any ads, right? This was documented in the Uber fraud case, right? Some of the vendors selling cost per install campaigns to Uber, they didn't run any ads. They literally fabricated, they manufactured the placement reports and sent it to the agency. You can just literally make up the Excel spreadsheet and say your ads ran here. If you didn't have an independent way of verifying that your ads actually ran, you just got paid millions of dollars for an Excel spreadsheet that said you got this many impressions. That literally happened, right? I'm not just making that up. So in those cases, it was 100% fraud, not just 92% fraud, right? So again, all those dollars that were being spent were going not only into the middlemen's pockets, right? So whatever exchanges, right, they made a cut of that. And ultimately, the dollar flowed into the pockets of the criminals, not to the publishers for actually running ads. But I'm encouraged now that it's kind of finally, people are waking up, and I hope the pendulum's swinging back the other way.
Local media publishers. You're already creating valuable local content. But what if I told you you're leaving serious money on the table every single week? Many local media outlets are only monetizing part of their inventory. Your stories are amazing and important to your communities, but they live and die on the page or in social. That means your ad space is maxed out, even though your content isn't. That's where localpod.co comes in. We turn your existing content into branded, automated podcasts with no extra work from your team. And we help you sell brand new audio ad inventory that didn't exist before. That means more ad revenue, deeper audience engagement, and zero added production time. If you're a local or niche publisher and want to grow your revenue without adding to your workload, go to localpod.co and book a free call. That's localpod.co. All right, back to the episode. Man, that is so dirty. It's crazy. All that goes to my head, I want like a Michael Lewis style, like The Big Short. Like a book or a movie about this would be fascinating.
Yeah,
to see
it's
how
coming.
This whole thing went down. Is it?
Yeah.
I hope it is. That's nuts.
I mean, the first cracks are visible right now. So, for example, you see that most of the holding companies, the media agency holding companies, they've all gone down, right? Their stock price has gone down, their revenues have declined, all that kind of stuff. And just yesterday I was reading there's a whistleblower who used to work at WPP. He's now suing WPP for covering up kickback schemes. So they were literally buying the media, getting kickbacks from the ad exchanges and from other vendors, and not disclosing it to their client, right? So all of this is really just now coming out. And some of the stuff mentioned in the lawsuit, right? This is a public complaint you can read, referenced things. I mean, this was from 2016. This is, 10 years ago, all this stuff was observed, but it's taken until now, 2025, for it to start to come to light. So like I've been writing about this stuff for 15 years. And the fraud has been happening for 15 years. It's just that it was uncomfortable for anyone to talk about. And in fact, in many cases, people were told, just don't talk about it, right? It's going to affect our revenue. So don't say anything.
Man, that is so crazy. You just remind me of, sorry, back to, pardon me, The Big Short. You remind me of like the Steve Carell character, just pulling his hair out. Like, why is nobody doing anything about this crazy fraud? That's, sorry.
And all the parallels, right? Like the verification vendors are kind of like those ratings agency that said everything is AAA plus rated, right? So everything is fraud free. Don't worry about it. Keep spending. Okay, there's a literally direct parallel to that. And I think hopefully when the crash happens, it's going to help correct digital advertising so that we can actually go back to real digital advertising where ads are actually shown to humans and the publishers, including the local news sites, actually get fairly compensated for aggregating the audience and showing the ads to people, not to software programs or bots.
How do you think a company would go about doing that? From what it sounds like, a lot of the problem here is the business model of those programmatic exchanges where they're a toll taker.
Yeah.
So volume equals money for them.
Yeah.
And that was probably the way they could scale the best. Yeah.
For the local news publishers was just too small. They were just no longer interesting to the advertisers. So I'll give you an example that I've personally worked through over the years. So I'm going to talk about medical publishers, right? They're also very niche. I won't name the names, but they also face the same kind of problem where I'll just use a particular niche audience, say oncologists, right? So you have general physicians, then you have other specialists like oncologists. There are certain publications in the medical field, right? You've heard of New England Journal of Medicine, Journal of Medical Oncology, and things like that. There are certain niche publications meant for those doctors, right? Say oncologists. Prior to programmatic, they were selling on what they called a share of voice basis because they knew that all of the oncologists in North America would be on their site throughout the month. Not a lot of page views, but they would all be there. So if a pharma company wanted to reach oncologists and they would take an ad on that site, they would have 100% share of voice, right? If there were two pharma companies, they would each get 50% share of voice. And that's great. Oncologists, like other doctors, don't generate a lot of page views because they're very practical and very surgical, right? They go to the journal, they look up the thing they need to find, they read the article, and then they leave. So they might generate 2 or 3 page views, not 15 to 20 page views, right? And so when you have a business model dependent on the sheer quantity of page views, that was what caused the problems. So then when this publication, this publisher that had a couple of these medical journals under their umbrella were forced to go to a CPM model, that's what basically killed them. They just didn't have enough page views to generate enough ad impressions to sell on a CPM basis. So my recommendation to a lot of these local news publishers is consider going back to a share of voice model, right? Because again, the local news sites and the smaller publishers simply won't have enough page views to generate the volume or the quantity, the tonnage that's needed for a CPM model. So if you go back to a share of voice model, especially when you're local and you have a very finite number of advertisers who want to advertise on your site, and you have a finite number of humans who live there who are interested in that local pub that actually goes to the website, that's the best kind of model that you can use because then you're not dependent on the exchanges. And you can basically direct sell all of that, right? Because there's a finite number of customers on both sides. It's not like you have thousands and thousands. A lot of the current belief is that, oh, we have to have the exchanges because we can't negotiate all these deals, right? That was true, but when you go back to the local area, right, there's a finite number of advertisers and there's a finite number of people who live there who care about the local advertisers' ads. And so I think that this will work. And that way it completely eliminates the dependency on the exchanges and all the other middlemen in between, right? And so then you again reduce the tolls. And this kind of brings us full circle back to my original article, which was I ran some experiments and publishers were, in the best case scenario, leaving 90% on the table. And that's because they never get to see what CPM the advertiser paid. So then whatever they get, they think, oh, that's what I deserve or whatever. But it's like, that's 90% of the money that should have gone to you that was actually taken by one or more toll takers or middlemen in between the advertiser and the publisher.
She's like 90% of the value. Connecting some dots, I had somebody on the podcast a while back, I'm not sure who it was, who they worked at a local publisher in the Bay Area over the last 2 decades. And the way she phrased it was, it's just like she could hear a giant vacuum sound coming out of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Sucking, like, from the Googles and the Metas and everything, but also these exchanges, just sucking all the value away from and it's a tragedy, really, for how important, local information is to people.
And that's exactly right, because if they are showing hockey stick growth, where the heck is that money coming from?
Yep.
It's literally coming out of the pockets of the publishers because it didn't go to the publisher. It went to the middleman. So, the advertisers have been significantly over-investing in digital, and all of it's led to these, hockey stick growth rates and profit margins for the middlemen, not the publishers. So I think it's time to start cutting out the middlemen and letting more of those dollars go through to the publisher so that not only can they survive, but they can actually thrive, because we now have seen real world harm, right? Harm to society, where with the lack of these actual publishers with real journalists and real editors, we're now seeing all this fake news come out to fill the void. When humans are reading all that, right? We've never been in a society that's more polarized than it is right now, because you tend to read the stuff that's in your own echo chamber. And a lot of it now, and we talk about AI is generating all this stuff, and it's extra polarizing. So, never has there been more need for real local publishers, real publishers, and real editors with real journalists who uphold journalistic standards, compared to all these other sites who don't care because all they want are page views.
Yeah, that's man. And the echo chamber part that's the scary part of what this all leads to. And that's obviously so true. I have people in my own life on both sides of there's only 2 sides of the political spectrum. And they're always sending me this inflammatory stuff of what the other side is saying. I'm like, well, that's actually not what my friend on this side is saying. Like, you're not even getting the same information. So that's what this all leads to. You know what I mean?
And ultimately, right now, me personally, I use a site called ground.news, where the main feature of that is that they actually show all of the different articles written on the same topic, and they categorize it left-leaning, center, and right-leaning. So then, first thing I look for is, have there been multiple articles written about this topic? Because if it hasn't been, I can't even trust that the topic is real. And if there are multiple, right, typically you'll see like 49 publications have written about this thing. And then you'll see the breakdown between left, center, and right. And then you can very clearly see some articles are so right-leaning, coming from those particular pubs, versus some that are so left-leaning, then I wouldn't even spend time reading those. So it helps me filter, because I used to do that manually, right? When I see something, I'll say, okay, well, I don't really believe that. I'm just going to go Google the topic to see if anyone else has written about it, right? Because if I see it from just one source and no one else has corroborated it, then I shouldn't trust any of it. You see what I'm saying? So I used to have to do that manually, but now ground.news helps do that a little bit more in an automated fashion, so I can see that.
I'm going to check that out because I'm very interested in that. Years ago, side note, I started a small podcast. It never really gained any listeners or anything. I called it the Bias Report, and I would take the top couple news stories each week that I found, whatever was going on, and I would report from the most right-leaning and the most left-leaning people and like compare them.
Yep.
It wasn't good for my mental health because everybody that reached out was mad at me on both sides. Yep. But I'm going to check that out, ground.news, or I'll go back in the recording and look at it. And I'll link to that too if anybody's interested. So my next thing I have was, what models do you believe will actually allow publishers to recapture value? But you kind of talked on that a bit.
Yeah,
does the whole model need to be flipped? Does the whole ecosystem need to, the dam need to break before that happens?
No, I would say some of the local publishers should force their way back into, share of voice model, because the CPM model literally doesn't work when there's small and finite volumes. So they just can't earn a high enough CPM for the number of impressions they can sell to just make a living. So I would say focus on local and focus on the advertisers who care and focus on the audience that cares for that local news pub, right? So if they don't do it, no one else will. And this gets back to the whole concept of misaligned incentives. Every ad exchange, they rely on volume that passes through their pipes because they take a toll, right? So the more volume that passes through their pipes, the more money they make. So they don't have any incentive to reduce the fraud or to help the small guy. So if the small guy doesn't do it themselves, no one else is going to help them. So it takes a little bit of courage to do that and kind of go against the flow or the trend. But I would say for local publishers too, it's a matter of survival, right? They really have to do that. And they don't, they shouldn't listen to the advice of the ad tech companies because those ad tech companies are the ones making hockey stick revenue growth off of their backs. Oh, and one other thing that I would want to bring up for local publishers, I have measured on some local publisher sites, and there's an enormous amount of bot traffic. And this was years ago. The reason it got to be that way is because they were so desperate for revenue that they took on some monetization partner, right? They said, oh, well, we got to be doing something wrong. We're not getting enough revenue. Can you help? And there's all these other leeches that came in and said, oh, yeah, we can help. We'll help you monetize. We'll help you get more. What ended up happening is that these monetization partners were the ones juicing the traffic using bot traffic. Right? So they were sending bot traffic to the local news sites so that they get more page views, so that they get more ad impressions to sell. Because again, they're trying to live within this CPM model. So now when the monetization partner is juicing the traffic, guess who gets left holding the bag? When they get caught, it's the local news publisher. Because then when a buyer says, well, it looks like it's 90% bot traffic, where's that coming from? It's this local news site. Then they call up the local news publisher and say, we want 90% clawback, right? We're not going to pay for this. It's mostly bot traffic. So the local publisher gets blamed, even though the monetization partner was the one that sent the bot traffic. You see what I'm saying? So my advice to the local publishers is to resist the temptation of juicing your numbers using bot traffic, and also be aware that even if you're not doing it, your monetization partner could be. So there are some publishers that might have already gone down that path. I would just say it's better for them to start weaning themselves off of that right now before they get hit with a 90% clawback, or before they get accused and found out by the big ad buyers. Because that's coming, right? More and more ad buyers, the advertisers, are actually asking these questions like, we don't believe that this local news site could be generating, 100 million impressions for us to buy. Let's go look into that. Once they look into that, they'll say, oh, of course, it's 99% bot traffic, and so this local news site is cheating. So I'm not going to buy from them before, and we're going to ask for all our money back.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So that's actually even worse.
Yeah.
So if the local news publishers want to actually start measuring, so I can help as well. I can offer FouAnalytics for free so that they can actually see if there's a bot problem on their own site that they were simply not aware of because Google Analytics doesn't show them and these other fraud detection companies don't detect it. So it might be worthwhile for them to actually check it themselves so that they can start the process of weaning themselves off of the bad habits.
Man, great advice. That is shocking. I see why everybody is raving about this. And a lot of this speaks to a big theme on this show of folks I talk to in local media that are thriving. And it's all about the top themes are, engage with the community, invest in owned media, newsletters, podcasts, do events. There's other way you have information that people want.
Yeah.
That's still a thing, but it's just,
Yeah. But those are hard to survive in a CPM-based model, right?
Yes.
There's just not going to be tens of millions of impressions thrown off by that. So change the business model, right? So that way you can actually thrive given your great content that your local audience actually cares about, right? So we need to go back to that. And so that way we actually can fund real journalism. We can fund, people who actually work hard to make sure everything's vetted before they publish it, not just the ones that just put out clickbait because they need more volume of page views.
That's great. I have a lot more questions I could ask you, but we are coming up on time.
All right.
I'd like to jump to flash forward 5 years. What are your hopes and predictions for basically everything we've talked about here, for all these giant, programmatic players? Like, how do you see this playing out? And it's hard to predict this stuff. Once again, back to The Big Short. They were all off on that.
Yeah.
But how do you see it playing out?
I really don't know how long it's going to take for something like The Big Short to happen in ad tech. So it's almost like I'm not going to wait around for the market to correct itself, right? I'm going to help the advertisers who care. So again, I've been studying ad fraud for 15 years. I can tell you for most of the 15 years that even the big advertisers didn't care because their goal was to spend all their budget, look innovative for buying as much digital ads as possible and not the old media like TV, print, and radio. So they had no incentive to admit that a large portion of what they were buying is fraud, right? So they would sooner cover it up than actually do something about it. But I actually see the tide turning, and I see more and more advertisers saying, okay, we know budgets are getting tighter going forward, so we need to be a lot more careful with our spending. So now some of them are actually asking harder questions, asking more questions, asking harder questions, and taking a closer look. When they find out that the fraud is more than 1%, I tell them don't panic. You couldn't see it before because you're using the legacy vendors. But now with better analytics, for example, my platform, that doesn't have to be my platform, but could be, just take a closer look. If it doesn't make common sense to you, ask harder questions. But again, once they look closer, I tell them, don't worry. If you find the fraud, we can now look at where it's coming from and you can actually do something about it, right? Start to reduce the fraud and make your campaigns better. So I guess overall, it's like I'm going to just keep doing what I'm doing, which is helping those who want to be helped. Right? There's still many players, including those middlemen, the ad tech companies, the exchanges, and whatever. They don't want anything to disrupt their current revenue and their current profit margin. So they're doing everything they can to prolong what's going on right now, which includes the fraud, and suppress anything new. So I will help those who want to be helped. And ultimately, for those advertisers, if they finally go back to showing ads to humans, they will start growing again. It's that simple, right? That's what I meant by going back to proper digital marketing, because a lot of the stuff that we've been doing in the last 10 years has not even been real because you get tons of volume. But remember that case example where the ads were not even shown, right? Let alone shown to humans. So, be aware of that and be more careful about your own spending. Have the independent tools to check it, because I wouldn't trust the platforms themselves, right? Over the years, even if the platforms are not deliberately lying to you, they're going to be underreporting the fraud because they can't see it because they use the legacy vendors. So they think everything's fine. So if you just trust the reports they give you, you're going to think everything's fine. So it's not. Just look more closely, ask harder questions, and look at your own sales, because that's ultimately the key metric that matters, right? Did you actually drive any more sales? And if you're a local advertiser, right, a small business owner, they're usually more vigilant than the larger ones, because if they spend $1,000 in digital ads and they don't get actually any more sales, they don't even have the next $1,000 to spend, right? So they're usually very vigilant about that. So I would say to the larger advertisers, be more like a small business advertiser, right? Be more careful about your dollars. Look at your outcomes and see if it's even worth spending the next 60 million in digital. If it's not, then do something else. Go back to local radio, go back to print, because you're going to, and billboards even, right? Because people actually drive by billboards and they see it. So there are other traditional things that actually work for advertising. So my hope is that we start to get back to more of that, even if the entire industry doesn't correct itself.
Man, yeah, this is wild stuff. I have to take a nap after this to digest all this information, but it's illuminating. And back to the them underreporting, even if it's not maliciously. Like I would say it is maliciously. Show me the incentives, and I'll tell you what people are going to do.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
That's right. So I'll kind of reiterate my offer. If any of the local pubs that you work with want to use FouAnalytics, I'm happy to set them up for free, because I do offer FouAnalytics for small and medium businesses for free. So they can then take a look at their own situation, right? There may not be a lot of fraud, but if there is, they should they should do something about it. And this is something that their Google Analytics and Adobe Analytics won't show them, because those are not designed to look for bots. So once they put FouAnalytics on their site, they can check that and see if there's bot traffic coming to their sites and what kind of bots they were and what to do about it if it is.
Excellent. I will do my best to spread the word about that, and we'll put it out there. Where can people find that? Where can people find you, and anything else you want me to link to?
I'll put links that we
talked about. Yeah.
FouAnalytics with an S.com, and they can find me on LinkedIn. I have 1,500 articles written over 15 years on the topic. All of it's data supported, right? There's usually charts in there that I kind of use to explain the phenomenon. So those are the two key places, on the website and LinkedIn.
Okay, and that'll be, anybody listening or watching, you can scroll down and I'll have links right there. So, Dr. Fou, thank you so much. This was amazing.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, and have a great day.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.